From Arizona, Mr. Schweikert to inquire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know, because we've talked about this and being on the Multi-Employer Pension Commission together, this is one of the passions of our office, even though I have very little of this population, but but one of my tense concerns is the math is actually much worse than all of us as a committee or population have our heads around. If you actually do some of the assumptions and actually stress them to reality, this is the biggest national issue. Because let's face it, over the next 30 years, Social Security and Medicare are 100% responsible for the growth of debt in the nation. The rest of the budget actually is $16 trillion in the positive. This is $48 trillion in the negative, and that's adjusted dollars. So this is the biggest issue in our society, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bartle, if I was one of these multi-employer plans, and did I hear you a moment ago say that 12% of them are in the red right now for qualifying?
The 12% figure that I reported to the committee was those are the plans that qualify under the three categories eligible for loans under this legislation.
Now, ending up in that category is when a plan has chosen an assumption, and even then their cash reserves, their yield, those things puts them in that plan. If I actually use last year's actuarial report and just use the corporate bond yield, only 7% of the plans are in the green. The vast majority are actually in crisis stage. So if I had a plan right now that's in the yellow, so I don't qualify, tomorrow this legislation passes, so I step up and say, hey, I'm going to actually go back to using a realistic net present value. Can I actually move into that category of being eligible for the loans and the grants?
The amendment applies that plans eligible to receive loans are those plans in the status categories as of the date of enactment of the legislation.
So if I see
the short answer would be no.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bartle, but if I see this coming before it hits the president's desk, I step up and do an honest calculation of my unfunded value, tell the world saying, hey, I've been lying to you, I'm actually in the red. Would they be eligible? Because remember, my concern is if I actually use 30-year treasuries, only 2% of the plans are in green. I mean, I've spent a year of my life never missing a meeting, doing the math. We're not telling the truth to the workers on how bad the problem really is.
Arguably, yes.
Yes.
A plan could
that's what we modeled in our office. And the tyranny of the 5-minute clock. There's a couple other things I really need to touch here. What happens in a situation if I'm one of the red plans, I qualify, I get the loan, but before I get the loan, I actually start to play with my numbers and I maximize because the game here is you've incentivized the plan to move to a grant. Can I, if I'm one of these multi-employer plans, play with the math to maximize the grant compared to loan?
Well, Mr. Schweikert, they have to use current liabilities in the application process, and then.
But current liabilities calculated on what NPV?
Well, and part of the application review process, remember, involves review by the PRA. So if someone were to I'll use manipulate, I don't mean that pejoratively.
Well, or just use the standard that a unionized single employer plan would have to use. Wouldn't that be prudent?
I would think so, sir.
And there's actually, Mr. Chairman, a flaw in the logic, and this is a concern we need to figure out to talk about. It may not be in our jurisdiction. So I've gotten the loan, gotten the grant. Have you just incentivized me as an organization to file for reorganization the next day, go to bankruptcy court, keep the cash, and once again, still do a cram down on my workers? I have this intense fear there may be some very smart people finding a way saying, I can get this money and then, boom, move to court and let court do my work out. Be careful. I see a minefield of unintended consequences coming at us. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.